Hello, my name's Tom, and things have really spiced up in F1 fantasy over recent weeks, but perhaps this is the spiciest weekend of them all, as Singapore could finally see a different winner to a Red Bull driver. Perhaps. Who knows? That's what we're here to try and work out. This is my current team on screen. We're going to dibble and dabble with various team builds and kind of discuss just in general how I think FP1 and FP2 have gone, what that tells us, and kind of where we want to put our teams this week. Do we still trust Red Bull? Do we want to go in with Ferrari? Is Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes suddenly on people's radar? Is McLaren still good? Is Piastri still good? There's so many questions, so we're going to I'm going to do my best to try and get into as much as I can. But first things first, as always, after FP1, FP2, I think it's important to just take a breath and have a quick look at the session times themselves. So here they are on screen. And why is everyone getting so excited? Because look who's P1, look who's P2 in both sessions, the Ferraris, which is why everyone is losing their mind. Because where are the Red Bulls? Max Verstappen in P3, okay, not the end of the world. Perez down in P7, okay, kind of about par for Perez this season. But then you look at FP2 as well, which is the more representative session because it took place at the same sort of time as both qualifying and the race are going to take place. And when we look at Red Bulls and they're down in P7 and P8, Max Verstappen in P8, that's kind of very unexpected. I mean, Max Verstappen has said in a couple of interviews in the build-up to this weekend that he's expected it to be a bit more difficult. He's talked down his chances and sounded kind of generally a little bit negative going into this weekend, and perhaps Max Verstappen was just completely spot on and we could finally see the Red Bulls not be on the top spot come Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. So definitely this is why everyone's going a bit crazy at the moment. When I say everyone going crazy, I mean it's me. It's all I've been thinking about all afternoon. Like, what am I doing with my team? So yeah, it's exciting for me. And not only are the Red Bulls struggling and Ferraris well on top at the moment, we also see in there the Mercedes. Look at George Russell in FP2 and P3 and Lewis Hamilton in P5. And not just the positions that they're in, but also the interviews after. Both George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, notorious downbeat kind of moany interviews after practice sessions, never happy with their chances across the rest of the weekend. Both of them really much more positive, much more upbeat. Lewis Hamilton saying it's the best FP2 this year. Like, I feel like we should be listening to Lewis Hamilton when he says stuff like that, and that's certainly why he's also on my radar for this weekend. The trouble is he is expensive, but we'll get to that. And then you've also got the McLaren boys down there as well. P6 in FP2 for Lando Norris, and P4 in FP1 with a big upgrade for Lando Norris. It's only on Lando Norris's car, not on Piastri's car, which is maybe why Piastri's sort of languishing down in P19 and P15, but I'm not worried about that. They've even said themselves, Piastri's never raced here before. He's just kind of breaking himself into the weekend gently, which is very sensible. You can't just go flat out on a tricky, difficult track straight off the bat, and when you've never driven on it before. So I'm not worried about Piastri, and he still features in the bulk of my team selections because he's at a good price, and I still just kind of trust him. But yeah, I do think the McLaren is certainly interesting, particularly Lando Norris, certainly one to watch this weekend. And then the other team, which have kind of on the radar, is Aston Martin, although I think when I say Aston Martin, I think more just Fernando Alonso. I think Fernando Alonso is definitely got some potential as well. So if we flick over to the F1 website, actually, before we go back to my team, you can see here the qualifying simulation pace, which I found quite interesting. That predicts, obviously taking into account data from the practice sessions. The official F1 website has ranked the teams in this order, putting Ferrari as the favourites for pole by just a fraction of a second. Red Bull are close behind, despite their struggles in FP1, FP2. So this is why I'm kind of like, whoa, hold on just a little bit. Maybe Red Bull aren't as bad as they appear, but I can't help but think this could be the chance, and we might have to be flexible with our teams and trust in a different team this weekend to Red Bull, although it does scare me somewhat. Other people up here on tops of qualifying, obviously Mercedes and McLaren, also sort of 3 tenths back from the likes of Ferrari and Red Bull. What gets interesting is the race pace around here. So you see McLaren down here in P4, and Mercedes in P2, say Red Bull in P2. When we skip down to the race pace, Red Bull suddenly find themselves on top, and Ferrari go from the top all the way down a couple of tenths. And bear in mind, this is like a couple of tenths per lap, so they're losing quite a lot of time throughout the 60-odd lap race. So it's quite a long race, hard, tough endurance race. We know Ferraris have trouble with tyre degradation in general, and we could see a little bit more of that come into play this weekend. So although everyone's getting super excited about Ferraris, I'm still a little bit like, I'm not sure how much coverage I want from them. I think it would be sensible to probably have at least some Ferrari coverage. And the fact that it's so open and so tight up here, and the fact also that it's actually quite difficult to overtake on this track, even with the track changes. I think it's going to prove to be difficult unless the FIA suddenly change their mind overnight and put the DRS zone in that new straight. Then I think it's going to be difficult to overtake, and qualifying could play a bigger role than most of your average tracks across the season. So, if Ferrari are super good in qualifying, then maybe their race pace doesn't matter so much. But it is, like I say, one of those tracks where degradation is going to be probably quite high, with the high temperatures and abrasive track, that sort of thing. So some more food for thought basically. But yeah, the Mercedes still sitting around in that P4 area, but then very interestingly as well, the McLarens move up from P4 in qualifying to P2 in race pace, and that's, I'm assuming, taking into account Piastri's pace as well, where he was, as we've already seen, way off the boil, taking his time to learn the track, that sort of thing, doesn't have the upgrades. So yeah, so that makes me think that Lando Norris is really, sorry, my dog's trying to get in the room. That makes me think that Lando Norris is super dragging this score, this time up from the McLarens, and Lando Norris should certainly be on our radars as well. As we see the Aston Martin down here in P5, a little bit further behind, almost half a second behind in terms of race pace, and more than half a second in terms of qualifying. Again, this could be kind of a mixture of Alonso plus Stroll. So when you take Stroll out of the equation, I'm sure that time gets a lot closer, and I think Alonso should be up there in our thoughts this weekend. But anyway, that's kind of enough of looking at that. And bear in mind, this is just the official F1 website. When you look at actual race pace data from various sources on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it nowadays, who knows, who cares. There's various sources which suggesting different things, saying like Perez was quickest, then you've got the Ferraris within like a tenth or so of Perez, and Norris right up there, but then Norris was on softs, and so on and so forth. So it's all a little bit like we don't quite know, which also brings me on to another topic of, I've already been considering using the autopilot this week, and maybe if I can build a team around enough of those front runners, with Max Verstappen potentially struggling, high chance of DNF this week, and getting a couple of other contenders for winning the race and maximising the points, maybe autopilot is even more in my mind going in this week. So this is my current team at the moment. Unfortunately, I've reset to 2 free transfers this week because I used the limitless perk chip, whatever you call it, last 2 weeks ago in Monza, and so it's reset me from three free transfers down to 2, which is kind of annoying because I really wanted some flexibility given the nature of what's going on in Singapore. There's so much variance, and I might need to make 3 or even 4 substitutions, which also brings me on to the fact that maybe the wild card could also be in contention this week if we want to really ditch off Red Bull and potentially go all in Ferrari. I don't know. It's really hard to tell. Depends what you read, who you listen to, as to and how much you read into like the interviews from the drivers and everything, as to how much Red Bull are truly struggling and how much they're going to really pull it back overnight and come back strong for qualifying and the race. So I've got a few builds actually, what I've done, because there's so many builds, there's so much variation. Rather than me clicking through, struggling to think it through, I've got some builds on screen I'm going to drag on, and we'll have a look together, and you can give me your opinions on what you think. So let's drag this over here, and hopefully that's all good. Yeah, that looks good. These are the builds that I'm sort of considering, and there are obviously multiple builds that you can do, because obviously the Red Bulls are looking good, the McLarens are looking good, the Ferraris are looking good, the Mercedes are looking good. So I need to try and have a bit of a plan for all things considered. If the Red Bulls look good, obviously this team in the top left is something I can afford and will probably go for if the Red Bulls, just look like, once again, they are going to be the number 1 team. This does, obviously, the top left team does run the risk slightly if there's a DNF, because I don't have the no negative this weekend. So if there's a DNF, it's going to hurt me being tripled up on both McLaren and Red Bull. Also, got Piastri in here as well. I think Piastri features in 3 or 4 of these teams, so that kind of goes to show how much faith I have in Piastri. I think he's at a decent price point, and drivers around him are like Stroll and Gasly, who just don't excite me. So I'd rather go with Piastri, even though he is the rookie amongst them. I just think he's worth it, and I want him sort of going forward. Come Japan, which is the next race after Singapore, Piastri will also have the big upgrade that Lando Norris has this week. So I think going forward, I probably just want to keep the triple McLaren. So it makes sense to keep Piastri in the team most likely. So yeah, that's what I'm kind of leaning towards. If Red Bull look good, if Ferrari look good, how much do we go in on them? Well, the team on the right, top right, is some more food for thought. If Ferrari looks solid and to actually do what is basically a massive criminal offence, and that is to drop Red Bull as a constructor. Now, I do think that the constructor slot is, the constructor slot on as well as your turbo driver are probably like the most important slots in your team. And dropping Red Bull, who have been consistently scoring, sort of averaging around the 90-point mark through the season, so far this season, in exchange for Ferrari, who are sort of averaging in the 40s. It seems ludicrous, but we have to be on the ball. We have to be flexible. And if Ferrari truly look like they might be the team to top the podium, then certainly this team in the top right with the Carlos Sainz, who's at a pretty decent price, to be honest. When you've got the Perez, Russell, Sainz all kind of in that region, Carlos Sainz comes in as the cheapest option amongst them. So that enables me to get this sort of team. And obviously, if you can't afford, if you haven't got the same budget as me, then you could always drop someone like potentially Piastri in this team, drop him down to someone in, like a Tsunoda or a Guan Yu Zhou, something like that, just to try and make up if you don't quite have the budget. So that's kind of what I'm looking at if Ferrari look good. Also, if I'm kind of not really sure, if I can't make my mind up come the deadline, and between Red Bull and Ferrari, then this bottom left team down here is also something that's strongly on my mind. Keeping the McLaren constructor throughout here, because I do think that they're still just excellent value for money. Keeping the Red Bulls because, with a lack of certainty that the Red Bulls are going to be kind of out the running, then I think it's still kind of potentially very important to keep the Red Bulls, as even though I've just said, I'm considering going the Ferrari build, and as you can see in the bottom right, maybe even the Mercedes build. But yeah, I do think that this bottom left team is a very nicely balanced team, and it sets me up very nicely for the autopilot as well. When you consider Verstappen, Norris, Alonso, Sainz, with what's going on so far in Singapore this weekend, I'll be completely honest, I feel like any one of those 4 drivers could score the most fantasy points this weekend, and therefore autopilot, if I pick a team like that, could certainly be a good option. Another thing you've got to think about as well is this just track specific for Red Bull? And I think it probably is, despite the whole technical directive coming into effect this weekend. Maybe that's hurt Red Bull, blah, blah, blah. But we just don't know that until we see a bit more, a couple more races, to be honest. But we got to think, is this just track specific? And do we, if we just offload on Red Bull, like the team of the top right or the bottom right on my screen at the moment, if we just offload Red Bull for this weekend, is it going to leave us kind of high and dry for the next weekend in Japan, when we probably want all the Red Bulls back in there all of a sudden? So this team in the bottom left is quite nice in my mind, with the exception of the fact I have to get Logan Sargent in here. But this is just my sort of team specific build for my personal budget. Obviously, if you've got a different budget to me, you might not be able to afford this. I guess alternatives to that sort of thing, you could potentially look at dropping Fernando Alonso down, because I think Aston Martin are the weakest out of those, out of Ferrari, Red Bull, and McLaren. If we cross out Fernando Alonso down here, I still think autopilot is viable with Norris, Sainz, and Verstappen sort of contending for the top points. So you could drop down Fernando Alonso to a mid-price driver if you don't quite have my budget. And then obviously the Mercedes plan, which I'm quite excited about, to be honest, just dropping Red Bull entirely. I'd probably have to wild card. I think actually it'd only be a -4 for me to get this with my 2 free subs. So it'd only be a -4, and then I could potentially wild card back into Red Bull going into Japan if I want to go kind of crazy. If I want to go absolutely ham, excuse the pun, ham with Hamilton and Mercedes. Now the Mercedes, like I've already touched on, they're really positive. The boys, George, Lewis, they sound positive. They've got they always improve from Friday. Friday is never good for Mercedes in general. So when it is good, maybe we should really be paying attention. And Mercedes could be the answer to our troubles here. And we could just forget about Ferrari, their inconsistent strategy, their tyre degradation, their silly strategy, or whatever. We can just forget about them. Red Bull will just we'll worry about them come Japan, but they just look like they're in trouble. If the Mercedes truly look great come Saturday and in the build up to qualifying and the deadline, then this is something that's on my mind, but it is quite extreme. I will hold my hands up. It is quite an extreme build with no Ferrari, no Red Bull. But again, it does look pretty decent with the likes of Hamilton, Norris, Russell, Alonso, kind of in that big main core. Again, it does run the risk a little bit with a DNF factor. It's going to hurt me because I'm tripled up on the Mercedes and the McLarens. But anyway, these are just kind of 4 builds that I've thrown together. I've been thinking about this pretty much all afternoon, ever since the practice session sort of took place, and I've been like mulling it over. Who do I want? The truth of the matter is, right now I don't know, because it's so close. It's so close in qualifying. It's so close in race pace. We don't know for sure exactly how much the Red Bulls are potentially struggling. We don't know if the Ferraris, if they qualify up top, are they going to drop back in the race? Is overtaking going to be any easier? I don't think it is, but it might be. Will a lizard walk on the track and just walk right into the middle of the track and just like cause a collision and DNF half my team? Who knows what's going to happen this weekend, honestly. But I'm trying my best to work out what the best team is. And it's kind of a decision. Obviously, we've only got one more practice session to go, so we don't have a lot more information to work out. And I'm kind of a little bit torn between all these different options. So when I'm torn like this, I feel like a balanced approach is probably a prudent approach. So potentially not the all-in on Mercedes build bottom right, but it's still something on my mind. The top left approach of triple Red Bull, triple McLaren looks pretty good in terms of going forward past Singapore. So maybe I just cling to that and hope it's the best team going forward. However, the Ferraris, we expected them to be good in Monza, but we didn't expect them to be good around Singapore, and there they are, P1, P2 in both practice sessions so far. So it's definitely a tough one to call, but these are kind of just my thoughts as per usual on a Friday evening whilst I've been mulling it over, stressing out, thinking, how can I tweak this and tweak that, and who's actually strongest, and who do I trust, and what sort of chip do I want to use if I want to use a chip. There's loads to think about, and of course, this is actually my 3rd video of the week I've done so far this week, and I'm actually doing a live stream next week as well. So tomorrow, Saturday, going into the deadline. It will not, however, be on my channel. I'm teaming up with the guys at FanAmp again, who I did a video with earlier on in the week. So if you want to catch me stressing out on stream this weekend, then follow me onto the FanAmp YouTube channel, and we can have a bit more of a discussion whilst I am probably pulling my hair out trying to work out exactly which build I want to go with. So yeah, come join the discussion. It'd be pretty cool to see you guys over on FanAmp's channel. But that's kind of where I'm at for now. Like I say, help, send help. What do I do? I know that's what I'm supposed to be here for you guys, but hopefully me just sort of mulling over my thoughts and feelings have helped you kind of collate your own thoughts and feelings, and then maybe you can comment on this video to give me some indication as to where you think might be the right way to go. So yeah, as always, thank you very much, and I'll see you hopefully for the stream tomorrow. If not, then I will see you for the Japanese Grand Prix in a week or so's time. So yeah, thanks very much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful weekend. Hope it goes well in Singapore for your fantasy teams. Bye for now.